talk about the origins of the Spanish guitar, and the origins really go way back in history. The earliest instrument that, at least the name sounds like guitar, is the kithara of Egypt, but it wasn't similar to a guitar at all. It was more similar to a harp. But then there was an instrument that they called the tambour in Egypt, and you can see like on the wall paintings that folks used these instruments. And then there's a number of other instruments that I list there: the tamburiza, the panchtar, the bouzouki, which are still played. And let's let somebody in. And it's just amazing that they were being played in ensemble like 3,000 and 4,000 years ago. Now, you probably heard of other instruments of the guitar family, like the oud, which developed into the European lute. The oud is an Arabic instrument. It was played by the Moorish populations in Spain, and it didn't have frets. And if you've heard like a modern player of the oud, you'll realize that that it's really useful to have no frets, because you can do all these sort of microtonal inflections that are part of the Arabic scale, which has a lot more microtonal inflections than our modern, our European scale. And if you ask the question, what's a microtone? Well, a microtone is an interval that is smaller than the half step on a piano, say from C to C sharp. And ethnomusicologists like to measure microtones in cents. So from C to C sharp, there could be 100 cents. And so I don't know that I could hear such fine distinctions, but you can measure it with various scientific instruments. The instrument you see on the right is the Baroque guitar. And yes, the guitar had an antecedent, its Baroque cousin. And the modern Spanish guitar really kind of took its full shape in around 1860 or 70 with Antonio Torres, who was a luthier based in Spain. But the Baroque guitar did not have a sixth string. It had basically what we call 5 courses. A course is a double string, kind of like a modern 12-string guitar. And the Baroque guitar sometimes had a double first string or just a single first string, which they called the chantera, I guess because you would play melodies, you would sing, the music would sing on that instrument. Anyway, so in Spain, the oud the lute did not become very popular like it did in the rest of Europe. And some scholars have conjectured that it was because it was too closely associated with the Moorish population. And of course, if you've heard the history of Spain, they persecuted the Moors, especially after 1492. They expelled Jews and Moors and forcibly converted the ones who remained to Christianity. But anyway, here's a little bit about the lute, an instrument of Baroque opera. And there's just a tremendous number of pieces written for it. You might have heard of Julian Brain, who was sort of a pioneer in bringing back the lute. That instrument on the left is a theorbo, which is nowadays coming back into fashion, played in Baroque operas, like operas by George Frederick Handel and Alessandro Scarlatti, folks like that. And it would have been used in place of the harpsichord. So now it's coming back. And anyway, so suffice to say that the Baroque guitar was the instrument of Spain, and before that, the vihuela, which I'll get to in a minute. Anyway, to summarize in my talk, the guitar has been adapted to all sorts of musical and cultural needs, and indigenous, Creole, European, Afro-diasporic, and of course, we continue to have the Spanish guitar and its legacy. The pedagogic legacy is very important. So finally, we come here to the two instruments, the Renaissance vihuela and Baroque guitar, brought by colonization. And I think I'll start with a beautiful pavane by Luis Milan. And let's skip that. And here's a page from Luis Milan's publication of 1536. El maestro, the master. And to give you an idea of the position of music as in the culture, Luis Milan also published a book on uh, card games, parlor games, and on the art of conversation. So what this tells us, this perhaps, is that music was considered part of the toolkit or finished education of a cultured gentleman or lady, such as might be at court, where Louis de Milan was actually worked for the royal court. And so this was a very refined, elegant music. It still sounds that way. It was contrapuntal, polyphonic, meaning multiple voices, kind of like very similar to choral music. Matter of fact, sometimes they transcribed choral music, and they would call that intabulations. So I'm going to play a pavane by Luis Milan. Here we go. Here we go. So that's a little pavane by Luis Milan. Something, if you go to a guitar recital, it became very popular to play about 6 of those by Mr. Milan. So if we go now to so that was the instrument of court. Now, at the same time, the guitar coexisted with this vihuela in the 16th century, but it was the instrument of the common people. It was a 4-string instrument, and the characteristic sound of the instrument was just strumming, not all this fine plucking. And in fact, I could put in the, let me do this a moment. I'll put in the chat space. Here's, what happened to the chat space? The term for strumming is rasgueado, and the term for plucking the individual strings is punteado. And you still see that basically being the two ways that the guitar is played for the most part. So we'll go back to we come to the next person, next major figure. This is Gaspar Sanz, and I actually attended a very interesting conference a couple years ago. I did part of my sabbatical in Spain and Tarragona, and I went to the town of Calanda, where Gaspar Sanz was born. And Calanda is also known as the birthplace of Calanda's other native son, Luis Buñuel, the filmmaker. And they even have a very odd museum there devoted to his films. But the place is so out of the way that I wonder how many people they have coming in on a regular basis. Anyway, Don Gaspar was a composer, guitarist, and organist, according to the musicologists, and a priest. But he's famous for 3 volumes of basically didactic works, the how-to books, teach yourself books on the Baroque guitar. And there's one phrase that appears in the book that I love to quote. He said that, "I will teach you how to play as many variations as you feel like, And that gives you an idea of what these books were about. He would have little, almost like what you might think of today as a lead sheet, just a basic tune, but then invite you to play variations, because improvisation was a very important part of this tradition. So his monster hit, I'll go to the next screen. His monster hit is Canarios. But before I go to that, let me talk about the system of notation that he used. He didn't invent this, but he made it more popular. It was invented by a man named Amat, who was a dentist, if you could believe this. But the idea was he would show you where to put your fingers on the fretboard, and if a finger was not used, there would be a ring on it. Isn't that clever? And so this was before the invention of chord theory. That had to wait for another 100 or 150 years by Jean-Philippe Rameau in France. So in those days, they didn't know what a C major or G major chord was. So it's a pretty arbitrary designation that goes, I think it goes all the way through M and N, if I recall correctly. And it starts with the Spanish cross. That's the first chord. And so he popularized something called mixed notation. I don't know if I went back to the El Maestro. Where was that? I didn't talk about this. This is the notation that Luis Milan and his colleagues used. It's basically tablature, and it shows you the rhythms, but which frets to put on the, where do you put your finger on which string at what time? And if it's an open string, it says 0, of course. So 1, 2, 3 means frets 1, 2, and 3. And this is very similar to what they do today with Guitar Player magazine and any number of publications that are for people who don't read music. But what I'm saying is that this book goes all the way from beginner pieces to very complicated pieces for virtuosos using this notation. And it was a brilliant invention because you didn't have to read music to play this. But then Gaspar Sanz got the idea, let's mix the sort of rustic excitement of the Baroque guitar, of the common people, with the contrapuntal elegance of the old Dervihuela repertoire. And so you get this very beautiful repertoire with pieces like Canarios. And I'll flip to the next screen. So his monster hit is Canarios. And Canarios uses something called sesquialtera, which if you've heard the tune America from West Side Story, I want to be in America, everything's free in America. You know what that is. It's like the measure is sometimes in 3 and sometimes in 2. And so this is a modern transcription. So the cheat that guitarists do, or guitar transcriptions, is that we add the 6th string to what's essentially 5-string music, and we just double the 4th string. And here we go. años. Isn't that fun? Very fun tune.
Yes.
So we go on. Oh, and you were, I didn't have the, I still had screen share. I'm so sorry. Silly me. Probably would have been more fun to see my hands and all that, right? I'm sorry about that. There's so many things to think about when you're doing this. So let's continue. I'll remember this time to stop the share screen for the next tune. Let's see, what do we have here? So, well, we had indigenous influences. And oddly enough, I used two pieces by composers who were not indigenous, but they were very admirers of this. So there's Villa-Lobos, who is Brazil's most famous composer. And I'll play Prelude number 4, which is called Homage to the Brazilian Indians. And the story about Villa-Lobos is that he loved the Amazonian Indian music, kind of disappeared into the rainforest for a year. They held a memorial service for him, and he crashed his own memorial service. So I don't know if that's true, but it sounds really cool, doesn't it? Sort of like that Mark Twain thing about the reports of his death were greatly exaggerated. So, and then here he is again. He was a cellist, and you'll be able to tell that from the piece because he likes to put the melodies on the bass strings. Here's the Indians that perhaps he presumably visited. And then Leo Brouwer from Cuba is a very famous guitarist and composer. And the piece I'll play is called Danza del Altiplano, in which he kind of, again, imitates the sound of flutes and drums. So I'll go back to, here we go. So a lot more fun to actually see the performers than a PowerPoint. So I think in this piece you have it's almost like a nose flute, I think, with the drums. And later on he kind of imitates the higher flutes with harmonics. Very delicate sound. So anyway, here's the Prelude 4 by Villa-Lobos. Anyway, that's the Villalobos prelude. And here's the Danza del Altiplano. Yeah, these pieces are a little bit ridiculous at times. Yeah, try to fit in all those tricks, but it's a fun piece. It's more of an encore really than a recital piece. So if we return to the share screen, let's see here. We have a. Well, I'm not going to play anything by him on this one, but he's pretty cool. Look him up. Raúl García Zárate. Got to interview him once for one of my research trips. So that music kind of reflects the main sound of the Andes, which is the panpipes, other wind instruments like canas, and the ritual drums. We come to the charango. I'm not actually going to play a live charango here, but on my YouTube, which I pasted in the chat room, you can see a little bit of charango play. What I talk about here is the unique ritual element of the charango. A lot of the Andean music is ritual in nature. That is, that it's played for important events like the summer solstice, in which the indigenous people also worship Pachamama, who's the earth goddess, and Inti Raymi, the sun god. And so obviously the two of those together give you the corn harvest. And from the corn harvest, they make chicha, an alcoholic beverage with which they get rip-roaring drunk during the festivities. And it's considered a ritual obligation to do so, not just fun and games. So the armadillo is either made out of, the charango is made out of armadillo shell resonator. But those instruments are now endangered, rather the animal is endangered, so you can't import them anymore into this country. I used to have one that was pretty cool, and New England weather killed it. It just cracked like an egg after 20 years. But the wind instruments more accurately reflect the mestizo aesthetic about what an instrument should sound like, a little bit warmer and so forth. The armadillo resonator sounds very sharp, shrill, and the indigenous people like to say a charango should cry like a cat. It should have that sharp sound. So I invite you at some point. I'm going to copy this little video. Invite you to see that in the on your own, if you want during the presentation. Oh, wait a minute. Let me stop the screen share. I'll put it in the chat space. Did I do that right? Oh, I have to V. There you go. And there it is. There's an interesting video showing basically the charango music that's used in this courtship ritual that I'm going to talk about in just a second. So all the young men of the village near Cusco have to learn how to play this instrument on some level. It's not a specialist instrument, but just be able to play it because that's how you get a girlfriend. You go around the market season during the two market seasons per year, and you kind of dangle ribbons and mirrors from the instrument to kind of capture the reflection of young ladies. And you try to get a young lady interested by playing your little tune. And if you catch her eye, you can start a conversation. The next step might be to go to a couple dance, which is actually all the men in one row and all the women in another. And then there's a night dance, which is after a few weeks of getting to know each other. And it's held on the outskirts of town. And during the night, the couples go 2 by 2 into the bushes and fool around for the first time. And if they find that they like each other, they embark on a ritual practice known as silvinacui, which is trial marriage. That is, they cohabitate. And the elders of the community tolerate this practice because they know that young people need to live with each other for a while to know if they get along. And I've talked to some young women from mestizo communities, and they say, oh yeah, silvinacui, what a great concept, because you can have had several silvinacuis and it's no big deal. But if you've been married and divorced 3 times, it's like a huge stigma, right? So that's what they say about the charangos. I invite you to listen to the little YouTube that illustrates that. And so some of the charangos are constructed to resemble the mermaid, because the idea is that there is a water deity that lives in a fast-flowing stream or waterfall, and you make a compact with this entity in order for your instrument to be tuned properly and to give it the power to seduce girls, you know. But the other flip side of this is that once you found a girlfriend and married her, you're supposed to put your charango away or give it to a younger relative or cousin, because to simply carry a charango around and to play it indicates that you're still on the prowl. You're a ne'er-do-well. You haven't settled down to family life. So they give the charango to their relative. So this next little bit is based on my own research in South America. And in the interest of time, I'll just be brief about this. The guitar is used in this region to celebrate Inti Raymi, the summer solstice festival, and there are about 7 different non-European tunings that they use. Here, this slide gives you an idea of I can send this to people afterwards too. This gives you an idea of the tremendous biological and climate diversity of Ecuador. And there's a map. I did my research in an area about an hour and a half north of the capital called Otavalo, which is also a famous market for textiles. Tourists go there. And Cayambe, which is about halfway between Quito and Otavalo, is where there's still this very strong tradition of these unusual tunings. They celebrate for 8 weekends, starting on June the 29th. And this is a tradition in which women are uncommon to other Andean communities. Women are singers and not just folks who prepare food and drink for the festival. And they sing these coplas, which are kind of like the folkloric wisdom of the people. There are also, when I did the research, men who call themselves chilucas, who are cross-dressed for the festival. It's not that they are LGBTQ in normal life. It's sort of a thing that they do during carnival season, like dress up for fun. And one of my informants, in a dress, put his arm around, said to me in a high-pitched voice, "Hey, where's my husband? I haven't seen you." Blah blah blah. So it's pretty funny. Uh, so there's different characters in the festival: the Diablos, the Payasos, and the performers of this instrument, which looks like an alpine horn, and commemorates the invaders, rather the resistance against the Inca invaders, because the Incas ruled in this area only for about 75 years before the Spanish colonizers came. And they also play a churro, a conch shell. And so this represents the militant tradition of the Cayambas, because they did resist. Here's some of the clowns from one of my research trips. This is interesting. The Diabluma is a double-sided mask, and this is a prankster character that might steal an orange from the crowd and feed it to, or from a vendor and feed it to the crowd. But in one case, they stole an entire roast pig, and the vendor went chasing after him because that's a little bit too steep. And the Diabluma itself is a word of syncretic origin, Spanish and Quechua, which means devil and spirit. But it's a diablito, like a little devil, they call it. I'm in the back here somewhere, more than 30 years ago, or close to it, in learning to dance with these guys and play the guitars in their special style. So if you look at the video, and you'll see me kind of illustrating, demonstrating that particular tuning that they do. And here's the waterfall where you go to make a compact with the Diablo on the eve of San Juan, which is June the 23rd. And here's one of my transcriptions of, see, they tune the guitar to open strings and then strum them. The folkloric poetry is very interesting. Let's talk about that a little bit. So I have Spanish translations. They range from bawdy to grotesque. Here's bawdy, grotesque to romantic and sublime, I guess you want to say. So, light of the morning, come out. I want to see you light up my window to see my lady. Here's one that the women sing. From the seas come pearls, from pearls come necklaces, but from the lips of men only come lies. Right. And then there's one about the guitar. I'm not a freshwater pearl, nor a conch from the ocean, nor am I a guitar that just anyone can play on. And then here's one for the guitars. What do you say, guitar? The life that you and I have led, you with your strings all torn off, me in love with no money. Pretty useless. And here's another one that was taught to me by one of my informants. Let's see here. Oh, it's about mother-in-laws, isn't it? Isn't that fun? Isn't that cute? Mother-in-laws. Here's one that makes me laugh. The day you were born, it was said, although it doesn't figure, that you were the spitting image of a friend of your father. So we'll talk a little bit about the music of the Pampas, and we'll get to it. There's a lot of regional musics in Argentina, and we hear about the tango all the time, but the rural music is very interesting and very, very characteristic. The gauchos, the music of the gauchos, these are the Argentine cowboys who rode the Pampas in the days before they partitioned it all off, kind of like the American West, a little bit like that story. They partitioned it off with barbed wire, and so their free living lifestyle kind of came to a close, but they're remembered. Right? So this is by Jose Luis Medellin, called Suite del Recuerdo, Suite of Remembrance, dedicated to Atahualpa Yupanqui, who is a wonderful folk singer and guitarist and folk songwriter of this area, and virtuoso guitarist. So I'll play a little excerpts of Vocación, Samba, and Chacarera. And let me turn off the stop share. So here we go. three excerpts from 7-movement suite called Suite del Recuerdo. So if we continue, and here's we continue with some little discoveries of mine. So this is a tune by Maria Luisa Anido, who was an Argentine guitarist who was a world touring virtuoso and composer for the instrument. Her material is not as well known as I think it should be. It's really quite wonderful. And she wound up returning to Catalonia, where she was from. And in her 70s and 80s was the guitar teacher at the Municipal Conservatory in Tarragona. And I was gifted a CD of her music played by one of her students. And it was just, this is my introduction to her. So I found this tune, which I added to my repertoire. It's really quite lovely. It's called Danza del Yucatán. So let's, here we go. And that's a little excerpt, Danza del Yucatán. And share the Venezuelan harp. I'm going to just play a couple of bars for this, so we're running out of time. So I'll just, maybe I could go 5 minutes over. Hope nobody minds that. If you need to leave, that's okay. So this is an excerpt from Los Caujaritos. And this tune was originally for the Venezuelan harp known as the arpa llanera. And the performer was I believe a legendary blind virtuoso of the instrument. And the harp seems to attract blind. There's a tradition of teaching blind people in South America the harp, so that they would have some way of having a livelihood, even if it was like playing kind of as beggars, I guess, or something. But this guy was became quite famous, and so it's a very rhythmic, syncopated style. Let's see if I can do it. Oh, let's get the stop share. Sorry, I always forget. Except I play that more completely, and I should say a bit better on the recording that I sent you. But it's kind of a tricky one. So if we continue then, share screen. Talk a little bit about Afro-diasporic influences. It's one of my favorite composers, Agustin Barrios Mangoré. He traveled throughout Latin America. His picture is on the currency, the paper money of Paraguay, where he was born, and he sort of represents them beautifully. And his works for guitar have become very popular, I'd say, the last 30 years, almost obligatory, like for competition and so forth. And some of his music, you can hear his love of Chopin. Other pieces, you hear his love of Bach. But a lot of them is just his love of South American genres like the machixe of Brazil, which I'll talk about in a minute. And the machixe was an early 20th century Brazilian dance that kind of broke the racial barrier and taboo in Spain. Kind of like in America in the early 20th century, when there was a taboo about jazz, there was and thinking, people thought that it's the music of the disreputable black underclass. That was kind of how people referred to the choros music and samba. But the machixe broke the barrier. So why? Because at sophisticated society ballrooms, the white girls from polite upscale families would dance with black boys and mulattoes because they were the best dancers. So this is how it got started. And Nestor Nazareth, who wrote many pieces he called Tango Brasileiro, in fact was writing machixes in order to not offend his upscale audience who attended films, for example, at the Odeon movie theater in Rio. Anyway, the rhythm is bum, chicka, bum, chicka, bum, chicka, bum. Excerpt from Machixe by Agustin Barrios Mangoré. And on the video, on the YouTube that I sent you at the beginning of this lecture, you can hear me play the more complete version. We continue with this tune, which is probably the most frequently played or covered classical guitar tune on YouTube. You can see everyone from 7-year-old kids to your grandmother. It's a great tune. The name means Sounds of the Bells. João Nabuco is very interesting in that he came from Northeast Brazil, which I said in the earlier talk is kind of considered like Hicksville for people from the famous urban areas like Rio de Janeiro and Sao Paulo. Matter of fact, I was talking about a guitarist that I know, a composer and guitarist I admire greatly, Celso Machado, and I mentioned him to Marco Pereira, who is from Rio, and he said, "Oh yeah, I love that music, but it's very simple, isn't it? It's harmonically simple." I said, "But it's very rich. It's rhythmically very cool." So João Nabuco moved to the big city and basically worked odd jobs, worked as a stonemason for a while, domestic servant, and gradually broke his way into the music scene. He never learned to read music, so quite likely he might have been one of these people who never played a piece the same way twice, like some folk musicians I've interviewed from South America, like Mr. Zarate. But he, this piece exists in many different versions, is what I'm trying to say. But here it is. show up in Nabucco standard Sons de Carilos. And he also wrote what I like to play sometimes called itching powder, Bo de Mico. And I wonder where he got the idea for itching powder. Maybe some of the flop houses that he had to stay in when he moved to Rio. Maybe I'll attempt this one. This is also in my video, and we'll probably end it there. This is Danza in E minor. This guy is greatly admired. I admire him in the guitar community. He just passed away, I think, a month ago. He lived in Queens for many years. He played at the Village Gate and kind of classical and jazz guitar. But he wrote any number of solos that are now standard among the classical guitar community, and this is one of them, Danza in E minor. And I will put the stop the share. Here we go. So that's the Danza in E minor. And maybe I'll just stop there before I break my neck, right? So.